What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. We're going to talk about Harlem, New York. One of the most famous clubs in Harlem during those years. 1920s was Club Deluxe. It was located on 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue. And the owner of the second floor of that club would be the former first black heavyweight champion. His name was Jack Johnson. And he would rename the second floor of that club the Supper Club. Jack Johnson would own that club from 1920 to 1922. He had a great thing going. You see, Jack Johnson knew how to make money. He knew how to take advantage of the times. He would have prostitution. He would serve alcohol, gambling. And who else would pull something like that off other than Jack Johnson? Every night he was making a lot of money, making a fortune. Unfortunately for Jack Johnson, a man from Sing Sing, he was serving a 20-year bid, would be released in 10 years. He would get out and strong-arm the establishment. And he would take over the club. Wasn't much Jack Johnson could do about that. He had his own problems with the government. And the gangsters had the police department in their right-hand pocket. They had the mayors and the governors eating out of the bottom of their hands. Well, that young man's name was Olin Madden. And he would promise Jack Johnson 20% on a nightly basis. And when Jack Johnson would approach Olin Madden for his 20%, Olin Madden would tell Jack Johnson, "Are you out of your cotton-picking mind? You're going to ask me for 20%? You will receive it when I give it to you." And as he was on his way out the door, he scratched his head. That sounds good. I think I'll rename this the Cotton Club. And that he did. There was a time when black slaves would ask the overseers to walk into the house so they can drink water. They can use the restroom. They would be told, "Are you out of your cotton-picking mind?" And that's where that old saying came from. Jack Johnson would go on to other ventures. But while he had that club running, he had some great black fighters that would come through that club. They would support Jack Johnson. They all faced Jack Johnson in their times of the ring. Fighters such as George Godfrey, who was the Leaperville Shadow, Theodore Tiger Flowers, the Georgia Deacon, Harry Wells, the Brown Panther, Jack McVeigh, the Pride of Harlem, Sam Langford, the Boston Bone Crusher, Joe Jeanette, who was known as the Iron Man, Bobby Dobbs, who's the former color lightweight champion of the world. They would all support Jack Johnson until that club was strong-armed. Now, in 1922, the club would be removed and renamed the Cotton Club. It was across the street from the Savoy Manor. It was located on 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue. It would seat 700 people. The former world heavyweight champion, the Manasseh Mola, Jack Dempsey, and Johnny Dundee would be regulars at that club. They would attend as Bill Bojangles Robinson, Louis Armstrong, Lena Horne, and the famous Nicholas brothers would entertain. Now, the Savoy Ballroom was opened up March 12, 1926. It was located on 596 Lenox Avenue, between 140th and 141st Street in Harlem, New York. It would open towards the end of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance reigned from 1918 to 1930. 10,000 square feet. And it would complete the entire block. Second floor, which entertained over 4,000 Harlemites. As you walk through the door of the ballroom, you would see a large band surrounded by pink walls. And conducting the band would be a short 25-year-old drummer. And he was a band leader. His name was Chick Webb. He would suffer from spinal bifida. But he had a 19-year-old young lady who would perform at the Apollo Theater. It was amateur night, and she was frightened to death. And she would start off singing, but she would forget her words. So she would fill in the blanks by scatting her words. And she would win the 1930 amateur competition at the Apollo Theater. Her name was Ella Fitzgerald. But immediately she would be brought in to the Savoy Ballroom, and she would be the main singer there. And what was amazing about Ella Fitzgerald, although 19, 20, 21 years old, all the famous singers would come to see her perform. Because during those days, you didn't have CDs or cassettes, iPhones. You had to literally go to the establishment of where that person performed. And at the Savoy Ballroom, the world heavyweight champion, Joe Louis, and his wife, Marva Trotter, would have a table specially arranged for them, whether they showed up that evening or not. No one could ever sit at that table. June 22nd, 1938, Joe Louis would knock out Max Schmeling in New York's Yankee Stadium. He would walk over the Willis Avenue Bridge after the fight. And he would find his way to the Savoy Ballroom. And he would dance the night away. And you would have famous dancers there. Dancers that would do the Lindy Hop and the Jitterbug. One of the most famous dancers was Frankie Manning and Norma Miller. And they would always win the annual dance competition. Joe Louis and Marva Trotter would be seen there often. That was the place to be. On a Saturday night, you could find Benny Goodman and Chick Webb battling in their competitions. 1937. 1938, you would find Count Basie and Chick Webb. Chick Webb would defeat both bands on many occasions. Unfortunately, at the age of 30, Chick Webb would die. But this club would continue. The fee was 30 cents before 6 p.m., 85 cents after 8 p.m. Ladies' night. First drinks on the house. Ladies didn't pay to get into that club, and that tradition continues to this day. Now, the ballroom would close July 10th, 1958. They would have financial issues, but it would permanently close October of 1958. You would have the Apollo Theater that's located on 125th Street. It was designed by architect George Keister. Located on 253 West Avenue, 125th Street, between Adam Clayton Power and Frederick Douglass Boulevard. 17,420 feet of dancing room, 1,506 capacity. Opened 1914 as the Neo Theater, later renamed the Apollo Theater in 1933. The Apollo Theater was reopened 1934 as Cohen and Sussman. 1935, Leo Beckerman and Frank Charlemagne. They took control of the new Apollo Theater. It would be a 19-year-old young girl. Her name was Ella Fitzgerald. And she would shake up that theater. She had a voice that was much older than 19 years old. A little petrified, but made it up with scatting. She is the godmother of scats. You would have the Nicholas brothers, the Berry brothers, Bill Bojangles Robinson, bands such as Lionel Hampton. You would have a 16-piece band, dancers such as Sammy Davis Jr., singers such as Dinah Washington. Amateur Night 1930. The winner there was Ella Fitzgerald. Amateur Night 1940. The winner there was Sarah Vaughan and Ruth Brown. Blackface makeup was no longer allowed. Al Joseph and others would be out of business with those skits. Josephine Baker will make her professional debut 1950 at the Apollo Theater. 1960, you would have Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, The Temptations, Wilson Pickett, Marvin Gaye, Four Tops, and the Stylistics. B.B. King. 1970s, you would have the Delphonics, Fifth Dimensions, Howard Melvin and the Blue Notes, the Stylistics, 3 Degrees, Spinners, Michael Jackson, Patti LaBelle, Wilson Pickett, and Billy Eckstine. You walk over to 116th Street, 252 West 116th, and you would find Grubbs Gymnasium. Billy Grubbs was the owner. He would be an opponent for Johnny Wilson, who was a former middleweight champion of the world. In that gymnasium, you could find fighters such as Louis Spider Valentine, Danny Cox, Nick Firebelly Jameson, Harry Wills, George Godfrey, Sandy Wilson, Walker Smith, better known as Smitty. You know him as Ray Robinson, Andy Nunelli, Smoke Canyon Winston, and many others. They would win competitions such as the Metropolitan City Championship. 1928, Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt, would be the middleweight champion in that competition. Inner City Golden Gloves, 1939 and 1940, would be owned in the featherweight division and lightweight division by Ray Robinson. Spider Louis Valentine would be beat out by Ray Robinson in 1939. He learned his lessons well, because in 1940, he didn't move up to the lightweight division as Ray Robinson did. He stayed in the featherweight division, and he would take home the gold. The PAL Boxing New York competitions was in full force. But 1938, the North American Metropolitan AAU competition was owned by Ray Robinson in the bantamweight division. Now, Harlem was established in 1658. The Germans, Irish, Dutch, Jewish, and Italians would all live in one community. After the IRT railroads were developed in 1880, 9th Avenue and 8th Avenues, the apartment buildings and the schools were being built. 1893, the National Recession would begin to hurt Harlem families. 1904, real estate market would take a crash. They couldn't finish their projects because once those IRT railroads were established, many families would move over to the Bronx, New York. Polo Grounds, 155th Street. Projects were being built, and everyone was leaving Harlem. But an entrepreneur by the name of Philip A. Payton would find rights, perfect moment to approach the builders and make them an offer that they could not refuse because the builders were stuck. They were losing money day by day. And Harlem was a red line section of New York. This means you needed a certain income in order to live there. It was designed to keep out the black community. Well, the proposal that Philip A. Payton would give to the builders, why don't you rent out these apartments and give them a fixed income? This way you know for sure you will get your return. And without hesitation, they signed ownership, the sections of Harlem, to Philip A. Payton. And the black community began moving in. And since the black residents had made less money due to their lack of opportunities, black families were making $1 to every $15 the white community was making. The Irish had jobs in civil service. They were cops. You had the Jewish that were working in the garments district. But the black families had to work as machinists or grave diggers. They worked in factories. And the money they were making were 15% less than the lowest paid white worker. This was all in conversation with the builders. And so their income allowed them to have a fixed rent based on the money they brought home every single week. Boxers such as Harry Wells, John Henry Lewis, and other smart investors would jump at this opportunity. And Harry Wells and John Henry Lewis would own many buildings, many apartments during that time. Plessy versus Ferguson was in full effect. And there was a famous restaurant owned by Johnson's. It was bought out by Sylvia's. And black families began to spread out all throughout Harlem. The Harlem Renaissance would now take effect from 1918 to 1930. You had a fighter by the name of Panama Joe Gans and Kid Norfolk. They were both part of the second wave of Black Murderers Row. And they were brought in to spar with Bill Brennan. Bill Brennan was preparing for a fight at New York's Madison Square Garden. And he would train at the Athletic Club in Harlem. He was preparing for his match with the Manasseh Mauler, Jack Dempsey. Panama Joe Gans was told, I need you to work with Bill Brennan. He's fighting a big fight, Madison Square Garden. World Heavyweight Champion. This took place in 1920. Panama Joe Gans, without jab, Bill Brennan. He handled him so easily that he was taken out of the ring. And Kid Norfolk, William Ward, was brought in. He was told, work with Bill Brennan. And Kid Norfolk found it so easy to hit Bill Brennan that he was toying with him based on onlookers. And in one round, he started to beat him half to death, and they took him out of the ring. And the Brown Panther, Harry Wills, was promised by Jack Dempsey from 1918 to 1924 that he would get a shot at his title. Now, in 1918, Jack Dempsey was already looked at as getting a shot at the title. The problem was Jack Johnson had problems with the government. So they brought in Jess Willard. Otherwise, Jack Johnson. Next opponent might have been Jack Dempsey. So Jess Willard would become the World Heavyweight Champion after 26 rounds. Cuba Havana. Jack Dempsey. And this was in 1915. 1919, Jack Dempsey would get his shot in Toledo, Ohio. And he would knock out Jess Willard. So between 1918 and 1924, Harry Wills was promised, if I get a shot, you will get a shot. And once he became champion, Jack Johnson never gave Harry Wills his shot. Signed a contract. He was mandated to fight Harry Wills. And he ignored the demands, and he was thrown out of New York for fighting. Could no longer fight in New York. And Harry Wills would meet the demands of Jack Dempsey. He was told you had to take on Louis Angel Firpo. And after Harry Wills would defeat Louis Angel Firpo, they would call it a no decision. It was a way of blackballing Harry Wills. But Harry Wills would own several buildings in Harlem. And he would often be spotted at the Savoy Ballroom. And the musicians at that time was Duke Ellington. Langston Hughes was a phenomenal poet. Zora Neale Hurston and Claude Maker. They would be the first of the Harlem Renaissance. Now, the young men in Billy Grubb's gym would turn out to become fine amateur fighters. But you have a very successful young man come out of Grubb's gym. Originally from Harry Wiley's organization. His name was Ray Robinson. And he would become a 5-time middleweight, 1-time welterweight champion. The Pennsylvania state middleweight champion. Harlem, New York would develop some great entertainers. As far as boxing, they all came from Harlem. Johnny Wilson, Jeff Smith, to Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt, Jack McVeigh, the Pride of Harlem, Kid Chocolate, who lived a short time in Harlem before he moved to the Bronx, New York, Sandy Sadler, Ray Robinson. The latest fighters that would live in Harlem, New York. Be Aaron the Superman Davis. Lonnie Bradley. Harlem is a beautiful place to live and do business with. I'm Scrapbook Boxing. Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Harlem, New York. Peace.